Alara Fontaine had always felt like she was born for something greater than the quiet town of Maplewood could offer. The streets, lined with sleepy diners and antique shops, felt like the walls of a cage. Life in Maplewood was predictable. People were born there, grew up, married their high school sweethearts, and settled into a life of routine. But Alara wanted more. She wanted magic. She wanted the stage. Her love affair with theater began in her grandmother's living room, where an old television set flickered with the brilliance of Broadway productions. She would sit cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide as she watched actors transform into kings, lovers, and legends. She memorized every lyric, every line, every expression. When the performances ended, she would stand on the worn carpet, pretending the shadows cast by the television were an audience applauding her imaginary bow. But dreams were fragile things in Maplewood. Her father, a mechanic, believed in honest work, in things that could be built and fixed with one's own hands. Her mother, a schoolteacher, preached practicality.
"Dreams are nice, sweetheart,"
she had said one night, smoothing Alara's hair.
"but they don't pay the bills."
Alara refused to believe that. At 16, she found an escape in the high school theater club. The small stage in the dusty auditorium became her sanctuary. She shone in every role, from Juliet to Lady Macbeth, losing herself in the art of becoming someone else. The applause, even from a small audience, was intoxicating. But it wasn't enough. The night of her high school graduation, as her classmates celebrated their future plans, college, family businesses, staying in Maplewood forever, Alara stood at the edge of town, staring at the road that led to New York City. Her heart thundered in her chest. The dream felt impossible, yet it was the only future she could imagine. She had saved every spare dollar from her after-school job at the local diner, stuffing tips into a shoebox hidden beneath her bed. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a bus ticket and a month of rent in a city that chewed up dreamers and spat them out. But fear didn't grip her. It exhilarated her. On the morning of her departure, her parents stood at the doorway, their faces etched with worry.
"You don't have to do this, Alara,"
her mother pleaded. Her father, arms crossed, said nothing, but the disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. Alara squared her shoulders.
"Yes, I do."
And with that, she stepped onto the bus, her heart pounding with anticipation. As the town of Maplewood disappeared in the distance, she whispered to herself,
"This is just the beginning."
I left my hometown with a one-way dream. Chase the bright lights, let them carry me. I thought the stage was where I'd belong. Didn't know the price of playing strong.
New York City was a beast with golden teeth. It sparkled in the distance as the bus rumbled toward it, promising opportunity, yet waiting to devour the weak. The moment Alara stepped onto the pavement of Manhattan, the city roared around her. Horns blaring, voices overlapping in dozens of languages, the hum of ambition thick in the air. She clutched her worn-out suitcase and took a deep breath. She had made it. But dreams did not come easy here. Her first few weeks were a battle against reality. The city was merciless. She lived in a tiny apartment with a leaky ceiling and a roommate who barely spoke to her. She spent her mornings rushing between auditions, her afternoons waiting tables at a dingy cafe, and her nights studying scripts under the harsh glow of a flickering lamp. Rejections came swiftly, each one chipping away at her confidence. Too tall. Too short. Not expressive enough. Too expressive. Casting directors barely looked up from their notes. She heard the same lines over and over. "We'll be in touch," or worse, a simple next. One particularly brutal audition ended with a director sighing and muttering, "Maybe Broadway isn't for you." The words cut deeper than she cared to admit. That night, she sat in her apartment, staring at the phone, willing it to ring, refusing to let tears fall. She had left everything behind for this. There was no going back. Then one afternoon, fate finally turned its gaze on her. She arrived at an audition for a small off-Broadway play, exhausted but determined. The role was minor, just a handful of lines, but she poured everything into it. When she finished, the director, a sharp-eyed woman with a graying ponytail, leaned forward.
"Where have you been hiding?"
She asked. 3 days later, Alara saw her name printed in a program for the first time. It was small, tucked in the back, but it was real. That first show was a whisper compared to the thunder of Broadway, but it was enough. Word spread. Critics noticed. Soon, she was landing bigger roles, her performances drawing more and more attention. She wasn't just acting, she was living, breathing, becoming the very characters she had once only dreamed of playing. Then came Eclipsed. The moment her name was announced as the lead, the theater world erupted. The show was electric, daring, the kind of production that would make or break a career. Billboards were plastered across Times Square with her face. Journalists called her
Broadway's next sensation.
Opening night was a blur of blinding lights and deafening applause. As she stood under the stage lights, the dream she had chased since childhood wrapped around her like a second skin. The ovation lasted minutes, a symphony of praise, of validation. Alara Fontaine had made it. But the higher she climbed, the thinner the air became. And the brighter the spotlight, the harder it was to see what lay in the shadows.
Oh, the limelight, it pulls you in, lifts you up just to watch you spin, loves you loud, then lets you go, once your heart believes you cold. So I walked away to save my soul, had to lose it all to take control.
The limelight was everything Alara had dreamed of and more. But as the months passed, she began to realize that more didn't always mean better. Everywhere she went, she was recognized. Strangers whispered her name in coffee shops. Paparazzi lurked outside stage doors, their cameras flashing like miniature lightning strikes. Interviewers dissected her childhood, her career, her fashion choices. Magazines debated who she was dating, what she was eating, whether she was still the same bright-eyed girl who had arrived in New York chasing a dream. At first, she tried to embrace it. After all, this was what she had worked for, wasn't it? The fame, the admiration, the endless praise. But admiration came with expectations, ones that felt impossible to meet. The schedule was relentless. 8 shows a week, back-to-back rehearsals, press junkets, photo shoots. Producers pushed her harder. Critics watched her every move, waiting for the first sign of weakness. The audience loved her, but they demanded more. Always more. She barely slept. Her body ached. Her voice strained under the constant pressure of perfection. She started losing weight, skipping meals just to fit into the designer dresses thrust upon her for red carpet events. Her hand shook when she signed playbills at the stage door, though she smiled through it, pretending nothing was wrong. Then came the rumors. Alara Fontaine, cracking under pressure? Broadway's brightest star burning out? Is the fame getting to her? She read the headlines in silence, her breath tight in her chest. The same media that had once celebrated her rise now hunted for signs of her downfall. And yet, she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. She pushed through the exhaustion, the anxiety, the feeling of being trapped in a role she could no longer escape. When people asked how she was doing, she smiled and said,
"I'm fine."
She told herself it was true. Until one night on stage it happened. She was in the middle of her most emotional scene, the one that always drew gasps from the audience, the one that had made critics call her a once-in-a-generation talent. She stepped forward, ready to deliver the line that had become legendary. And then nothing. The words were gone. The stage, the lights, the audience, they all blurred together. Her breath hitched. A cold sweat broke across her skin. The silence stretched too long, an unbearable eternity. The audience shifted, waiting. The lead actor beside her whispered her line under his breath, trying to nudge her back on track. But she couldn't speak. The moment shattered. The scene moved on without her. She had never felt smaller. When the curtain fell, she stumbled backstage, gasping for air. Someone asked if she was okay. She barely heard them. For the first time in her life, the limelight felt suffocating. And for the first time, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The whispers turned to roars overnight. The moment Alara Fontaine forgot her line on stage, the world smelled blood. By morning, headlines screamed her failure from every major publication. Alara Fontaine freezes on stage. Is Broadway's biggest star losing her shine? From brilliant to broken, the downfall of Alara Fontaine? Has the pressure of fame finally crushed Broadway's golden girl? She sat in her dressing room, staring at the newspaper clippings scattered across the vanity. Each word cut deeper than the last. Losing her shine. Downfall. Broken. Outside, the theater bustled with activity. The show would go on. It had to. But Alara felt hollow, as if something inside her had fractured that night on stage. She couldn't stop replaying the silence, the way the audience had shifted in their seats, the way her co-star had tried to save her. The next few performances felt like walking through a dream, no, a nightmare. She hit her marks, said her lines, but the magic was gone. She could see it in the audience's eyes, in the wary glances of the crew. They were waiting for her to fail again. And then came the anxiety attacks. They hit her backstage, in the quiet moments before the curtain rose. Her chest would tighten, her vision would blur, and for a few terrible seconds, she would feel like she was drowning. She tried to push through. She always had. But the more she fought, the more the fear took hold. One night, after a particularly brutal performance where she had stumbled over a monologue, she rushed out the stage door, ignoring the calls of fans and photographers. She walked the city's streets in a daze, the neon lights blurring around her, the honking of cars, the distant music from bars. It all felt surreal, as if she were watching the world from outside herself. She reached a quiet street, away from the chaos of Broadway, and leaned against a brick wall, gasping for air. She couldn't do this anymore. Not like this. The realization struck her like lightning. She didn't go home that night. She didn't show up at the theater the next day. By the time the producers, the press, and the world realized she was gone, Alara Fontaine had disappeared, vanished from the limelight. And no one knew if she was ever coming back. The world searched for Alara Fontaine. Paparazzi camped outside her empty apartment, waiting for a glimpse of the fallen star. Journalists speculated on morning shows, offering theories with exaggerated concern. Some said she had checked into a rehab center. Others claimed she had fled the country. A tabloid even ran a headline suggesting she had run off to a remote island with a secret lover. But the truth was far less scandalous. Alara was by the sea. She had traveled miles away from the glittering marquees and suffocating headlines, finding refuge in a quiet coastal town where no one recognized her name. The air was clean, the waves ceaseless, the rhythm of the ocean a stark contrast to the relentless ticking of Broadway schedules. At first, she didn't know what to do with herself. She had spent years chasing perfection, running on empty, surviving on applause. Without it, she felt like a ghost of the girl who had once stepped off a bus in New York, eyes full of dreams. But slowly, the silence became her friend. She spent her days walking along the shore, feeling the sand between her toes instead of the pressure of expectation. She read books she had never had time for, scribbled forgotten thoughts into a leather-bound journal. And for the first time in years, she slept, really slept, without the weight of tomorrow crushing her chest. Weeks passed, then months. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, she found herself humming a melody, a song from one of her old performances. The sound startled her. It felt foreign, yet familiar, like something she had lost and was just now remembering. She missed the stage. Not the fame, not the pressure, but the art. The raw beauty of becoming someone else, of telling stories that made people feel. But she wasn't sure if she could ever return, not to the way things were before. One morning, she ventured into town and stumbled upon a small, independent theater. The wooden sign above the door was faded, the paint peeling, but there was something warm about it. A handwritten flyer in the window caught her eye. Casting for local production. All are welcome. Alara hesitated. Then she stepped inside. The theater was nothing like Broadway. There were no flashing lights, no critics waiting to rip her apart. Just a modest stage, a few rows of seats, and a handful of actors rehearsing with nervous excitement. The director, an older man with kind eyes, approached her.
"You here to audition?"
he asked.
Alara opened her mouth to say no, to say she was just passing through, just curious. But then she smiled.
Yes.
She said.
Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't standing in the limelight. She was stepping back into the love of the craft itself. And that, she realized, was enough.
Every role